once you've made amends to the degree that you can, that's it. You're whole. There's nothing else that you can do, and there's nothing else that you really need to do. Too many men focus on the uncontrollable. So here's tip number one. I told you there was a couple of bonus tips. Tip number one is your ability to move on in your life is not contingent upon somebody else's acceptance of your apology. Forgiveness is something that we hear a lot about. Most of the time in the context that we're given, it's learning to forgive others for their indiscretions and wrongdoings against you. And there's really value to that. We've all learned that it lets you be free. It releases you of the burden of carrying around that baggage, and it allows you to move forward in your life that you would not be able to do if you can't learn to forgive others. But what I want to talk with you about today is how to learn to forgive yourself. I think oftentimes it is, in many ways, easier to forgive others. It's certainly more tangible, and it's certainly more relatable, and definitely more talked about. But there is a devious and deceitful practice of holding on to past guilt and shame for our own wrongdoings and indiscretions against others. And while I know it's very, very difficult to get over the challenges or the hardship and heartache that you may have caused to somebody else, it's paramount that you learn to forgive yourself so you too can release the burden that maybe you were carrying around. This allows you to grow. It allows you to evolve. It allows you to move forward. It allows you to serve people more effectively who you wouldn't be able to serve because of the fear and the guilt and the shame that's holding you back from moving forward with your life. So today I'm going to share with you 5 simple strategies, not always easy, but very simple, that you can employ not only on a daily basis, but very systematically and intentionally to help yourself get over and forgive yourself, to release the shame and the guilt that you may have been holding on to for weeks and months and years and maybe even decades. Now, before I get to that, I just want to mention my good friends and show sponsors over at Montana Knife Company. I talk about these guys a lot. I've talked about it in the past that I used to have advertisers and sponsors here that didn't really jive or mesh with our brand and what we're trying to do and the mission to reclaim and restore masculinity. But that is not the case with Montana Knife Company. These guys make knives 100% made and sourced in America, hunting knives, everyday carry knives, culinary knives. They just came out with a brand new hatchet that I'm very excited to get my hands on. And if you're looking for a great knife, a great tool, as men need tools to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish, then I would suggest you look no further than montanaknifecompany.com. If you do end up picking up one of their knives, use the code Order of Man at checkout, all one word, and you'll save some money when you do. Again, montanaknifecompany.com, use the code Order of Man. Guys, let's jump into this. Let's talk about forgiving ourselves. It's very difficult when you've wronged someone in some way. I've had my own fair share of struggles and challenges and things that I've done to other people, and I feel like I've done a fairly good job at forgiving myself. And that's not to say that we forget, but there are some things that we can do to ensure that we can move forward and drive on with our lives. Then I've got a couple of bonus tips and ideas for you, mindsets for you as well. So the first thing that we need to do is recognize and acknowledge our deficiencies. A lot of the times we don't even acknowledge the fact that we may have hurt somebody, or we may have wronged somebody, or maybe we feel it's so minor that it doesn't warrant forgiveness. It's difficult to do anything, to move forward in any way in life, if we're not willing to acknowledge the reality and the gravity of the situation. This might be the hardest thing for you to do because in many cases, you're going to need to revisit something that you may have done to somebody else that maybe you're not even totally aware of, but there's still underlying guilt and shame associated with how you behaved and how you performed and how you showed up. So the first thing that we need to do in order to forgive ourselves is to acknowledge that there was something that we actually did and be very, very clear about the gravity of the situation. Not only what you did, but what was the impact to another person. to the other party. Again, nobody wants to revisit this because it's uncomfortable to look at our own inadequacies and how we may have screwed up, but you can't move forward unless you base everything that I'm going to talk with you about today on the foundation of truth. And that means that you acknowledge what you did to another person and you explain to yourself, I should say, at least understand that there was some problems and there was some challenges and it created a host of consequences for the other party. Now, once you've done that, you can move into the next step, which is to make amends. Now, we can't always make amends. Maybe these people are no longer in our lives. Maybe there's nothing necessarily to compensate an individual with. What's done is done. But if there's an opportunity for you to genuinely apologize, then I would suggest at a minimum, you apologize to the person that you wronged. And you don't just say, I'm sorry. You say, I'm sorry, I did X, Y, and Z. I can see how this would impact you in these several ways. And I feel very badly about what I have done and how I showed up. And here's how I showed up. Here's how I was underperforming. And again, I am sorry. Now, guys, once you've done this correctly, you don't need to keep doing it over and over again. That is one thing that I see a lot of guys do because there's guilt, again, and I'm going to help you get over that, but there's so much guilt and shame that they think that they just need to keep apologizing, and maybe on that 17th try or that 100th try, that all of a sudden that guilt and shame is going to go away. That isn't how it works. You have to do the rest of the formula for the guilt and the shame to begin to dissipate. Now, granted, it just takes time, but once you've made amends to the degree that you can, that's it. You're whole. There's nothing else that you can do, and there's nothing else that you really need to do. Too many men focus on the uncontrollable. So here's tip number one. I told you there was a couple of bonus tips. Tip number one is your ability to move on in your life is not contingent upon somebody else's acceptance of your apology. Let me say that again. Your ability to move forward with your life is not contingent upon somebody else's acceptance of your apology. I had this question come up on our Instagram page. And by the way, I would love for you to follow over there. I'm very active and I want to communicate with you guys there. Is at Ryan Michler. My last name is Michler. And a gentleman said, because I was talking about this issue in one of the posts, a gentleman said, well, you can't move on unless the other party accepts your apology. That isn't true, because there's situations where somebody may never accept your apology, and that's their prerogative. Clearly, they have a right to do that. But using that logic, what we're suggesting is that a man stay trapped and bound to his guilt and shame forever simply because somebody outside of his control decides not to accept his apology. Another example is what happens if that individual is not reachable or has passed away. Are we obligated to remain trapped in the things that we've done in the past? The answer is no. So tip number one, outside of the formula I'm sharing with you, is to learn to make the apology and not have that apology mean anything or be contingent upon a certain way you want somebody to behave. Now, a lot of the times I'll see men attempt to make apologies, but they're disingenuous because they're only doing it to manipulate the other party to get them to say, I forgive you. And that feels good. So that's why so many men are after that. If somebody says to you, hey, I forgive you for what you've done, you feel like that absolves you of some of the consequences or the responsibility. It doesn't. And it shouldn't. Because number one, it's manipulation. And that's never a good thing. To manipulate another person, it's disingenuous because maybe you're not actually sorry. You just want that person to make you feel better about your poor decision making. And also, again, to my point a second ago, it doesn't give you the opportunity to release yourself, because if you're waiting for somebody else to validate or approve of what you're doing and how you're trying to make amends, they may never do that. And we cannot learn to forgive ourselves if we're only reliant upon other people's performance and the way we would like them to show up. Now, granted, it's nice when people learn to accept an apology. It feels good. It helps us move forward. And what I would suggest in that case is that you learn to accept other people's apologies. When somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm sorry for doing this thing, then you learn to afford them some grace, because hopefully the grace will be afforded to you. Now, not always. And it's really difficult when somebody has wronged you in a serious way to accept their apology. Now, look, that's not to say that we need to embrace it. That's not to say we need to put ourselves in harm's way. That's not even to say that we need to forget what that individual may have done. But if somebody's trying to make a genuine effort to make amends and make things right, to the best that you can, I think it's crucial that we learn to offer some grace, as we would like to be afforded grace in our circumstances. So again, point number 2 is making amends, but it has to be free of any expectation or covert contract, meaning you have this idea of the way that the person is quote unquote supposed to respond to you, and only then does it count. Free yourself from that. Make your apology. If they acknowledge it, don't acknowledge it. Yell at you, don't yell at you. Accept your apology. None of that really matters, because all you can do is make amends to the degree that you can. Now look, we've acknowledged our shortcomings. We've attempted to make amends where we can, and we've done it once, not 1,000 times, not even 10 times. We've done it genuinely and sincerely once. That's it. Now we can begin to move forward with forgiving ourselves. We have to take care of those two things first, because we can't move into forgiveness for ourselves unless we attempt to make the situation right. That's by acknowledging the situation and then making amends where you can. The next thing that we need to do is to begin to extrapolate the lessons that need to be learned from the problem that you created. Okay, if you stole from your employer, for example, what lesson should you take away from that? If you went through a divorce like I did because partly you showed up in an inferior way, what lessons can you learn from that situation? How should you show up better in future relationships? How should you show up for your kids? For me, it was substance abuse. The lessons I learned is I have to stay away from alcohol, because that creates problems, obviously. And it creates greater problems to a greater degree for certain people more than others. That's the case for me. So that's a lesson that I've learned. And now I'm actually better off today than I was a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years ago, because I learned the lessons that I needed to learn. I identified what those lessons were, and I'm an entirely new man than I was, like I said, 2 years ago. Now, when I say things like that, people often jump to the conclusion of, yeah, well, Ryan, that must be nice that you learn these lessons, but people are still impacted by the negative decisions that you made. That is 100% true. I don't want to deny that. I don't want to tell you that isn't the case. Yeah, there's real world consequences and fallout to people that you love, people you care about. And it is what it is. It's not a permission slip to forget what you've done. In fact, I would encourage you to remember how you showed up so you don't make those poor decisions again moving forward. But ultimately, if you can look at these experiences and you can begin to learn lessons, and then ask yourself, am I a better man today than I was because I went through this situation? And with me and my divorce, for example, I am a better man. My ex-wife is still impacted by that. My children are clearly impacted by that. And it's unfortunate and it's sad. And in many ways, it's heartbreaking for my kids. But I can't do anything about that. That is beyond my control. Okay, all that I can control and focus on is how can I be a better, for example, father now moving forward? How can I be a better partner to the woman that I'm in a relationship with now? And I'm trying to show up in a positive way, which leads me to point number 4. So if point number 3 is to learn the lesson, it's easy to learn the lesson. It's easy to identify what you did wrong and how you would do it differently moving forward. But infinitely harder is actually applying the lesson. So you have to apply the lesson. Look, you're going to have slips. You're going to have stumbles. You're going to fall. You're going to mess up. You're going to screw up. You're going to revert back to old patterns and old ways and previous ways of thinking. That's inevitable. But we have to make a conscious effort to apply the lessons that were being learned and actually mold and craft and shape ourselves into a new kind of man, a new partner, a new community leader, a new father, a new friend, a new colleague, coworker, mentor, brother, coach, etc. You have to mold yourself into a new man. You have to have the systems in place to be able to do it. You have to track your progress. These are things that we talk about and we have talked about for almost a decade with this movement now. So I won't get into the details and the nitty-gritty of how to do that, because ultimately what I want to do is give you the formula and then we'll backfill it with other information in the upcoming months and years. But guys, you have to be able to apply these lessons on a daily basis. And look, a lot of the times people will apply lessons hoping that other people will see the new kind of man they're becoming, and then again, get the forgiveness from others that they want. That's not what we're after. Again, that's manipulation. Okay, that is not a pure motive. I'm going to act in a certain way so people will recognize and see me perform in this certain way. Therefore, I will get the validation that I need. That's manipulation. That is not a virtuous way to go about doing this. And it's also not going to lead you to the forgiveness that you want to have for yourself, because you know you're deceiving other people. And ultimately, you know, even if subconsciously, you're deceiving yourself. You're not doing this the way that it's intended. So become a new man, not for anybody else, not to fix the problem that you've already fixed and identified, because that was in point 1 and 2, but because it's the right thing to do. If you want to be a better husband, then be a better husband because it's the right thing to do. If you want to be a better father, then be a better father, not so somebody could see you and pat you on the back and tell you how wonderful you're doing and what good jobs you're doing and how much better you are than you were. No, because it's the right thing to do. And it's because you want to become that type of man. It's intrinsically valuable, in other words. There's no external that you need, because internally, it's important you acknowledge it. And that's the kind of man you want to be, purely for the sake of being that kind of man. So let's recap real quick, and then we'll get to point number 5. Excuse me, I'm a little congested. I'm fighting some allergies, but we work through it. Again, number 1, acknowledge your deficiencies. Number 2, make amends where you can. Number 3, learn the lessons that need to be learned. Number 4, and this is really where the rubber meets the road and where you begin to give yourself forgiveness, is applying the lessons consistently, habitually, and continually. And by the way, if you mess up, it's okay, fix it, start back at step number 1 and go through that cycle again. The last point that I want to make to you, and then I'll give you one more tip before we close it out today, is that it's okay to recognize your growth. In fact, you should want to. If you're anything like me, as a high achiever, a hard charger, when we accomplish goals and we improve and we do something great, typically guys like us don't even take time to acknowledge it. We're just driving on to the next point, the next goal, the next mark. And while I think there's a lot of value in moving forward with your life, I believe there's value in taking a breath and a breather and say, you know what? I'm a lot better than I used to be. I'm a better partner than I was before. I'm a more engaged father than I was before. I'm a better community leader than I was before. If you can begin to be very precise about how you've improved and how you've got better, now it's easier to forgive yourself because you acknowledge that I am getting better, not in spite of my past circumstances, but because of my circumstances. I think about this quite often with my alcohol abuse. If I wouldn't have gone through that situation and my ex wouldn't have brought that to my attention, and I think there was things that happened that I wish would have gone differently, but at the end of the day, I'm a better man because of that experience, not in spite of it. It's actually part of my journey. It's part of the process. And I'm, in a way, grateful for experiencing those things. I'm not totally excited about it. Wish the circumstances would be different, but they're not. So I have to be grateful for the circumstances so that I can be more satisfied with who I am moving forward. So guys, take some time, even daily, to acknowledge that, you know what? I was a pretty good dad today. I played baseball with my kids, or I got involved with their homework or their extracurricular activities or walked them through a challenging situation. You know what? I showed up really well for my partner today. I cared about her. I loved up on her. I appreciated her. I showed her how much I cared about her. It's okay to acknowledge that. We don't need to gloat or boast in it, but acknowledge it. All right, guys, I'm going to give you a couple of tips, and I already want two more actually, and I already hit on one of these, which was your forgiveness is not contingent upon another party's acceptance of your apology. The second point that I wanted to make, and I did hit on this already, is that you need to focus on what you can control. There are so many things to focus on in life, and this is what keeps us bound and shackled to the guilt and shame that we have when we've wronged somebody, is that we focus on things that we have zero control over. The circumstances, why you may have done what you did, and you're excusing it away or blaming it on somebody else. Somebody's not offering your some grace to you, and so you can't move forward. That's the problem. The more you focus on things beyond your control, the more you are slaved and shackled to the thing that you don't want to be shackled to, which is guilt and shame. You want to be tied to pride, and not being proud, but pride. Maybe I'll reverse those. Not pridefulness, but being proud of the growth that you've experienced. It's probably a better way to say it. You want to be tied to hope. You want to be tied to optimism and evolution and growth. And you can't do that if you're focused on things that you have no control over. So again, forgiveness is not contingent upon their acceptance, focusing on what you can control. And then there's one last tip that I want to share with you that is very, very liberating when it comes to forgiving yourself. Teach others the lessons that you learned. And that's hard, because what that means, and this is what I've had to do in a very public environment and setting, is that you need to not only understand and become familiar with your inadequacies, but you actually need to expose them to other people. And I'm not saying that you have to go profess this to the world. I'm not saying you need to start a podcast in order to do it. I'm just saying if there's people in your life that would find value or gain value or benefit from your experience, we have an obligation to share it with those individuals. I talk about this often. If a man has a tool or a resource that he can share with another person that will help them on their own personal journey, then we as men, righteous, virtuous men, have a moral responsibility to share that with somebody who will be positively impacted by that word. It is not easy. It is not comfortable. It is not always enjoyable, but there's opportunities for you to talk with friends and family members, colleagues, co-workers about what they may be going through the lens of what you went through. I'm telling you, when you start to do that, you can see that you can become a powerful source of good and growth. And as I said earlier, hope and optimism. Guys, I want you to forgive yourselves. I don't want you to have this guilt and shame just hovering over you like this dark cloud, keeping you from the light, keeping you from accomplishing big and great things. And please understand that. You are made for great things. You are deliberately made, intentionally made. You are here for a reason. And if you're binding yourself to things that keep you from that, you're going to live an inferior life. And also, you're not going to be serving people the way they need to be served and the way you specifically can serve those individuals. Let's recap. Acknowledge your deficiencies. Make amends. Learn the lessons. Apply the lessons. And then lastly, recognize your growth. The tips I shared with you is your forgiveness is for yourself is not contingent upon another person's acceptance of your apology. Focus only on what you can control and learn to share your experiences with other people. I hope that serves you. I hope that releases you from some of the baggage and the rocks and the bullcrap that you've been carrying around, because I want you to move forward for yourself, and I want you to move forward for the people in your life who can be served by you. Only to the degree that you're willing to move forward when you mess up, as we all do. All right, guys, I will be back next week for another interview in our Ask Me Anything with my co-host and good friend, Kip Sorensen. If you guys have other conversations you'd like me to address, please let me know. Hit me up on Instagram at Ryan Michler. You can see the conversations that we're having over there and involve yourself in the discussion, because I'd like to have that dialogue and feedback with you guys. And we'll keep fighting the good fight of reclaiming and restoring masculinity. All right, guys, go out there, take action, forgive yourself, and become the man you are meant to be.